What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Donald, and it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a one-off. You know where this is going, so let's get into it.
The Last Item, Part 2. Written by Jonathan Howe. Read for you by Daniel Howe. "It's here," Julia said, holding her hand out. A glowing blue shape coalesced into her hand, taking the form of a gun. "Stay behind me." Gavin stepped up next to her. "This is something I need to face." A crash followed as someone tumbled into the house through the back door. "You don't get it," Julia said. "I can read the say lines. This intruder is supposed to kill you." Gavin froze up. He'd been expecting it, but it wasn't something he wanted to acknowledge out loud. Come out," a man's voice sounded from the hallway. "If I'm going to die, I'm taking as many people with me." Without warning, he charged into the living room. He was a tall, pale man with dark hair and sunken eyes. Julia shot. The gun didn't make a noise, but did puff. The bullet hit the man in the chest, passing through him. It didn't appear to draw any blood, but the man still staggered. Julia shot him again and again. The glowing bullets left no holes, but the man seemed to suffer. "This is only fighting off the entity, driving him to fight," Julia said. "You're going to need to kill him." "What?" Gavin exclaimed. "No, I can't." "Gavin, do you want to survive?" He steeled himself, muscles tense. He scanned the room with his eyes, searching for a weapon in reach. The attacker had dropped a wicked-looking knife not far away from them. He rushed forward, scooping up the blade. The attacker saw and dove at him, taking Gavin to the ground. The knife flew out of his hand. The pair rolled, the intruder coming out on top with his hands on Gavin's throat. He squeezed, beginning to choke the life out of Gavin. Well, it was a nice idea, Gavin thought as his brain lost oxygen. But this is it. Julia tackled the man. Gavin sat up, retching and gasping for air. "Watch out!" she called to him. A puffing sound filled the air. The man screamed. Gavin turned to face them. Julia held the glowing firearm before her, pointed at the man. She pulled the trigger again and again. Puffs sounded as the projectiles tore through the attacker, leaving no holes. Some kind of shadow pulled off of him, writhing in the air. Gavin searched the ground for the knife. It laid across the room. He crawled on the ground towards it while Julia kept firing on the man. "Gavin?" a voice called. His mom stood at the base of the stairs, looking in. Time stopped for a moment. Gavin getting almost a third-person view of the room. The knife was off to the side, halfway between the attacker and himself. His mom stared, horrified, frozen in place. Time started again. Gavin moved to reach the knife first. The attacker lunged as well, shrugging off Julia's shots. Gavin stretched a hand forward just as the attacker reached out, grabbing the handle. Gavin flung himself onto the man, feeling the bite of metal in his arm. He screamed but held on, rolling the man over. Gavin sat on his attacker, trying to wrest the knife from his grip. The man used his free hand to claw at Gavin, leaving gashes on his face. Julia stood over them, trying to help get the knife. "No, back off," Gavin grunted. He couldn't worry about her and the man at the same time. She did as asked, looking for other ways to help. "Over here," he heard his mom say. The attacker looked up, but Gavin didn't. The hand which held the knife strained forward, trying for Gavin's heart. He heard shuffling in the kitchen before Julia came back with a large kitchen knife. The man screamed under Gavin, throwing his weight to buck him off. Gavin held firm. Keeping the knife hand down, the man reached up with his free hand, attempting to gouge out Gavin's eye with his thumb. He pulled his head back, avoiding the man's hand, as well as seeing Julia plunge the knife down. The man sputtered and writhed on the floor. Gavin felt warm blood begin to seep into his pants. He held on until the man's wrist went limp. Gavin let go, sitting up to look at Julia and his mom. "What is going on?" he asked. His mom stood in the kitchen, brandishing a knife in defense. Julia looked down at her hands and the blood that was beginning to stain the floor. Julia, what was that gun you had? She looked up, her irises still glowing a faint blue. It's my weapon against the wraiths, she said. That doesn't clear anything up. I explained my story already, Julia continued, but I didn't get to finish. I can see the say lines, the weaving of power through the world. Along with those, I can see the creatures beyond the physical. These wraiths are what give people their expirations. They feed on the say lines that come off a person when they die. And the magical gun does what? Gavin said, backing away slightly. If used correctly, it separates them from the host they're using to affect the world. So then why didn't it work on that person? He said. Why didn't the man stop until we killed him? I'm not certain, Julia pondered. It might have to do with his own date. Didn't he say something about his own death? Gavin nodded, recalling the moment. He moved forward again to look at the man. He pulled the collar of his shirt down, stretching it enough to glimpse a date in the same place on the sternum as Julia's. 4/15. Gavin trailed off in confusion. What is it? Julia asked. This date is for tomorrow, Gavin explained. Julia's eyes went wide. A sharp and sudden pain tore into Gavin's neck. He coughed up blood. Looking down, he met the eyes of the man he thought to be dead. They were completely black, like something out of a nightmare. I will have my feast, the wraith said in a guttural voice through the broken body. Gavin felt lightheaded before slumping down. As everything went black, the last thing he saw was Julia summoning a glowing blue sword to swing through the man's neck. The eyes went back to normal, or at least he thought they did. It was hard to tell as everything faded. Gavin drifted, like people do when they dream, experiencing the world as a bystander. Scenes flashed around him, like movies of his life. Eventually, one came into focus, spreading over the others and pulling Gavin in. He was 12, and in the park he'd shown Julia. Earl, who was also 12, was below him on the ground, struggling to climb the tree Gavin had scampered up. Come on, Gav, Earl complained. Help me up. You can do it, young Gavin said. Gavin didn't speak himself, or at least the words didn't feel like his, even though he inhabited the body they originated from. Until then, the body continued, I'm gonna wait for you at the top. Gavin turned to climb the tree. He remembered this day. He had gotten above the leaves until a branch snapped from under him, and he'd fell to the ground. He'd broken his arm and 2 ribs, a feat that Earl never let him live down. The body climbed, taking Gavin's soul with it. He remembered the path as it got higher, the memory coming as it played out before him. When young Gavin reached the top, he poked his head out of the leaves and onto a field. Gavin started, his spirit separating from the child's body. The field was empty, save a stone monolith up ahead. It was a rather large sword sticking out of the ground, the blade stretching up 100 feet into the sky. Rather than build into a hilt, the blade was broken off. Gavin searched for the hilt. Knowing what to look for, he saw it laying in the tall grass a ways off. He didn't see anything else, so Gavin walked towards the monolith. There's nothing to find, a voice said. Gavin spun, seeing a figure standing in the field behind him. The person had features that never stayed the same, almost like a default video game character, with every trait slowly sliding through all the options. Their hair was short, then long, then fell out. It regrew curly, then repeated the process. At the same time, the colors cycled from black to brown to red to blonde to white and back. Their skin did the same, as did their form. Gavin watched for a long moment before he realized he was staring. Sorry, what was that? I just said, they replied in a new voice. You won't find anything by the sword. It is a relic of the past and of my failures. As they spoke, their voice did a slow shift through sounds and accents that Gavin noticed. Okay then, he said hesitantly, looking around again. Where exactly are we? They were completely alone in the field, save the towering sword.
This is a place in between. It is neither life nor death,
not physical or spiritual, not past
nor future. It is between all.
Gavin stared openly, trying to wrap his mind around it. Do I even have a mind here? He thought. It wasn't worth dwelling on, he realized. Okay, so does that mean I've died?
Not quite,
the person said.
Since you are still between, you can go either direction. If you pick the choice to move on, then yes, you will have died.
Does this happen to everyone? Gavin asked.
No. Julia's interfering on your behalf.
They waved a hand, and the scenery to the left changed. It showed the living room of his home as he'd left it. His mom wept in the kitchen, his dad now there to comfort her. Julia clutched his cold body in her arms as tears leaked from her glowing eyes. The same blue energy that made up her weapon seemed to be flowing into him. Gavin looked away from the body, shaking off the unsettling feeling.
She's using the power I lent to her, giving you the option to live.
Why? Gavin asked. Why is she trying to save me? I just met her.
Those aren't questions I can answer, they said.
But aren't you God? Gavin spat. Shouldn't you know everything?
I'm not God, but merely the guardian of this world. And before you accuse me of being the poor guardian because suffering exists, know that I am not a guardian of the physical realm, but of the balance between. I exist in the in-between, unable to truly affect either side. I can only lend my power.
It sounds like God to me, Gavin said.
I have not met God, but I know he exists far outside my power.
Gavin didn't respond, letting the words hang in the air. Finally, the Guardian spoke again.
But as to why Julia is trying to save you, I think it's because she likes you.
Gavin's face flushed, or he imagined it would have if he had a physical body. Again, we just met.
And you liked her, even though you'd just met,
they pointed out.
I am not an expert on human experiences. I can never know them, but I can observe. Julia probably thought you were charming and worth trying to save. She's been looking for someone worth saving for a while.
Saving from what? Gavin asked. You mentioned being a guardian, and she said something about wraiths. What is going on? The Guardian didn't respond immediately. When they did, their voice was deep.
There are those who want only what the physical offers. They will do anything to get it. My job is to protect the balance of the worlds, at least.
They trailed off, looking to the sword. What do they want? Gavin asked quietly.
Change.
I don't understand.
Being able to change, to experience something different from before, is a physical human attribute. The wraiths are beings who lust after that, going as far as to try devouring the whole world,
the Guardian said. And the Saylines? Gavin asked.
They are the spiritual presence flowing through the world. While the two are technically separate, they exist in the same place. Say is the spiritual power flowing through your world.
Gavin looked at the sword as he tried fitting the pieces in his mind. So they're separate, but then existing together, and this place is between that. Shouldn't there be wraiths passing through here then? The Guardian shook their head sadly.
No, that is a result of my failings.
When they didn't elaborate, Gavin sighed. What would those failings be? He rolled his eyes, throwing the Guardian an exasperated look. They had the form of a child now, wearing a smirk.
I could not drive them back, keeping the realms separate. The best I could do was barter with the wraiths. The result is your world, in which each life is timed. When that day comes, the wraiths are allowed to devour what is left of each person's life.
Was the world not always like this? Gavin gasped.
There was a time before the dates. Your human perception calls it BD.
Before destruction, Gavin finished for them.
Yes, I failed, and as a result, your world was almost devoured. The deal with the Wraiths was my best attempt at saving what was left.
Gavin stood frozen in place. A world without dates, he thought. What would that be like? Gavin let the revelations wash over him for what seemed an eternity. There was no way to tell a passage of time in a place where nothing changed. The light didn't change directions, the sky didn't change colors, and the statue didn't decay. How long Gavin stood was unknowable. "So what's the point?" he finally asked.
Sorry?
The Guardian asked. "What's the point in going back to a world you failed? Why wouldn't I just let myself move on?" The Guardian stepped up next to Gavin. They looked like a grizzled, middle-aged man.
Because you can change it.
Their form shifted to that of an elderly woman.
The deal with the Wraiths put them in a place outside of my reach, but you can fight them.
"I have to fight all the Wraiths?" Gavin asked incredulously. "Yeah, I choose death."
Not all of them. They have a leader, the one who made the pact with me. If you can find and defeat them, your world will be freed.
They wore the form of a young girl.
It won't be easy, but you won't be alone.
Gavin looked back to the scene of Julia holding his body. She wept openly, the tears staining his face. Something in Gavin's heart broke. "Why is she crying for me?" He looked to the Guardian. They didn't answer. "Why? She barely knows me. I'm just another person. Why?" They looked directly into Gavin's eyes for the first time. It was disorienting to watch the body change around the gaze. Even still, Gavin held the contact, determined to get an answer. "I'm going to help," Julia's voice rang out, unusually loud. "I'm going to keep my promise." Gavin looked over, eyebrows furrowed. "What promise?" he said quietly. "She didn't promise me anything." The scene shifted before him. Julia knelt, hugging his younger brother, William. "I'll make sure your brother survives tomorrow. You got that?" she whispered.
Promise?
William replied quietly.
Promise,
Julia said, squeezing a little harder. The scene faded away. Gavin laughed, a tear rolling down his cheek. "That's not fair," he said, letting out a choked mix between a laugh and a sob. "Now do I really have a choice?"
You always do. That is one of the facets of being human.
Gavin rolled his eyes, turning to the Guardian. He stood up straighter, fists clenched. "What happens now?" The Guardian smiled, their body a dark-skinned woman.
You will go back, freed from the pact I made with Jyotai.
Will I be like Julia? Will I be able to see the spiritual?
Yes, but it will be different. She is my champion, the one I first chose. I cannot lend any more power. Rather, she is sharing her power with you, letting you draw on it.
Gavin nodded. "I don't get it, but I don't think I would anyways." The Guardian laughed.
That's probably true. One more thing. You will find Jyotai in the place where life stops. I cannot say more. You won't remember most of this conversation, but you will know that.
"Wait, but..." The ground seemed to snap under Gavin, and he began to fall.
We will meet again,
the Guardian said, as Gavin fell from the tree like he did when he was 12. He didn't feel the impact the same way, but it still knocked him out. Gavin gasped, sitting up quickly. He was back in his body in the bloody living room. His hands flew to his neck. There was a bumpy scar, but no open wound. He looked around. Julia and his parents watched him, wide-eyed. He smiled nervously, meeting Julia's eyes. "You get to keep your promise," he said.
All right, we're back. Yeah, if you haven't read, or if you haven't played or watched the cutscenes of Xenoblades 1, 2, and 3, because I've played those games and loved them, ended up taking inspiration from all of them. For like my one viewer who has watched all of them, he already knows. I talked to him about it, but like they're all very clearly there. That being said, I really did enjoy this one. I think I will continue the project, but I believe that is a good stopping point for the one-offs as they go. If you have more questions, dang, sorry. I guess you'll just have to hope that I can become an author and write all the things I want to write, because then I'll get to make that one into a book. But yeah, until then, thanks for showing up. Thanks for watching. Point of order business stuff. I might miss a week or two coming up here pretty quick. A week or 2 or 5. I broke my iPad, which I use to make videos. I'm using it very gingerly this week, but because Daniel was recording, it's not that bad. But if Daniel's not recording, then I might have to send it out. I'm waiting to see what Apple announces, but they're freaking taking forever. I don't know. I'm just... I'm waiting to see. So give it a bit. I might, they might either be lower quality, or I might just do some quick, hey, I didn't really get to post much, and just have that be it. But yeah, until then, thanks for showing up, and I will see you guys again next week. Anyway, okay, bye.